Recording in progress. Well, I'm excited to spend a few weeks talking about Emily Dickinson. The most ridiculous thing about all this, though, is that just in a few weeks, we could not scratch the surface possibly about learning about Emily Dickinson, her life, the life of those people that she associated with, and particularly having an appreciation and understanding of her poetry. But we'll just do the best we can and go as far as we can. If we need to, if we find that we are enjoying her poetry, once we get into that in more depth, we can extend our sessions 2 or 3 weeks and take up some more poems. Dickinson, when we look at her and look forward in a week or two to start to try to enjoy some of her poems and interpret them and appreciate her mind, her great mind, the more we know about her life and those people that she associated with, the more it's going to make sense to us. It's like we were talking about the New Testament, that it's all in context. You know, she was born in 1830. So we have to think of what was going on in 1830, what was life like in 1830, who else was living in 1830 that she may have known or known about, and that she may have even associated with. She had a lot of friends that influenced her, and we'll be talking about some of those. Individuals as we go through it. I thought I might, if I'm successful, pull up on the if I share. I'm really out of my league now. I'm going to try share screen, and I want to pull up the one that is the Emily chronology. Yeah, you get. Do you see it?
Got it.
Is that coming up? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we see there that she was born in 1830. Some of these dates are not going to be significant, but she had an older brother who was born a year before in 1829. His name was William Austin, but he went by the name of Austin. And then in 1833, the family, she had a sister named Lavinia who went by the name of Vinnie, and so there were 3 in the family, 2 girls and a boy, and so Vinnie stayed in the house, as did Emily, for her whole life. She was never married, and she lived her entire life there in the homestead with the rest of the family. And we'll talk about her more, and especially in the context of the role that she played in the ultimate publishing of some of Dickinson's poetry and getting it together and deciding on which of her works to publish and so forth. And so all this family lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, which I was sort of thinking might have been a town in 1830 about like Chapel Hill would have been. It was a college town. Most of the people in the town had some association with the college in one way or another. Many of Emily Dickinson's friends, her father, her brother, they all at one time or another worked for the college, either in a paid position or in some sort of advisory position or some boards, or what the way that helping to run the college. And so we move on. I'll move on down through this a little bit. One of the things that I want to talk about, and so this is going to be a little bit disjointed, but I want to talk about what was going on in Amherst in 1830, and particularly attention to religion, because we're going to be talking about Emily's poetry, not primarily, but we're going to specialize in talking about the faith-based poems that she wrote, poems that she wrote about the afterlife, poems that she wrote about death and so forth. So prior to 1830, in the first half of the 19th century, there was a big religious revival that went through New England. And there were a lot of revivals held in various towns. And there was sort of a coming back to God after the 100 years before that we refer to as the Enlightenment. So people were sort of pulling back away and saying that science explained everything. And all. Well, the Great Awakening was the return to faith-based communities and it was not particularly denominational. It was Methodist, Presbyterian, Mormon. Most any religious group in the United States was undergoing these revivals during this period. But it so happened that Emily and her family went to a church there in Amherst. It was was of a denomination called Congregationalist. And they are still around. There are a few Congregationalist churches now in New England. And it is sort of like maybe more attuned to being like Presbyterian than Methodist or Baptist. Their beliefs are sort of more in tune with, say, John Calvin than they would be John Wesley, as an example. So if you think of it as sort of a more fundamental Presbyterianism, if you will, and a sort of a Calvinistic look at religion from a standpoint of predestination, from a standpoint of infant baptism, from a standpoint of millennialism, the thinking that there would be a return of Christ at some predetermined date in the future, and so forth. So this was swept through this area during this period, just about the time of the 10 to 15 years before Emily was born, and on up until she became a mature adult. It was going on, and so she would be a part of this and realize what was happening. And so we're going to see later on how that's going to influence her life and her poetry. One of the things that I did intentionally in formulating this chronology was to put into the chronology some dates of people who were close to Emily that passed away during her lifetime, that she lived to see them die while she was still alive. And some of them were younger than she was. You know, here again, the times of Emily Dickinson, death was a common thing, and you didn't anticipate that everyone, even young people, were going to live to be adults. So she lost some of her friends at an early age, that they passed away. And so just to make that point, that was a tremendous influence on her beliefs, on her faith, on her religion, and it was reflected mightily in her poetry. So we'll see that as we're going along. Her next door neighbor, Susan Dickinson, who was her sister-in-law, lost a young son. I think he was only 9 years old, and Emily just loved this young man, and she just doted on him, and that had a tremendous effect on Emily, and she never really quite recovered from it, as well as some of her adult friends. So I'm going on down here, sort of skimming through this chronology. We don't need to take up every single item on it, because I hope you all have read it. But the first instance that is known of Emily starting to write poetry would have been when she was about 19 or 20, and there's an example of a Valentine that she sent to a friend, and she attached a poem along with it, which would be common during that one period of time. Something else that is very, very common to the era in which Emily Dickinson lived is letter writing. Letter writing is a thing of the past now. Very few people stop and write handwritten letters to anyone. But in those days, that's the way you communicated. You wrote letters. And I'm going to take this off the screen if I can stop share. Yeah, I'll take that off because I've got a copy here that I can refer to the things that I wanted to highlight. But keep that in mind that as much, hi Susan, as much as we appreciate her poetry, she was a prolific letter writer, and if she had a friend, that's the way you communicate with your friend. You wrote letters. So some of these people that are in this chronology here, she had letter writing correspondence with that lasted decades. Hundreds and hundreds of letters were written, and unfortunately, when Emily Dickinson passed away, a lot of her letters had already been destroyed. A lot of them were destroyed later. A lot of them were destroyed at her request when she died, that she wanted. So it's like a lot of other great figures. Sometimes you'll have the letters written by one half of the two parties that were writing letters, but you don't have the letters from the other half. So we may have the letters that the person she was writing to wrote back to her, but we don't have the letters that she wrote to them. And there may be cases of that that are different. But her letters are just as beautiful as her poetry, and just masterful. We'll maybe tonight even get to a couple of her letters. So she did start writing poems at some point. Emily Dickinson was a person that I don't know how to frame her as someone, how much we should appreciate someone that had such a depth of appreciation of things that are just mundane to the rest of us. Her sister-in-law, who lived next door, she said, in my whole life, who also wrote poetry and wrote books and articles, and she was brilliant in her own right. So she made the comment one time, she said, you know, anything that I've ever read, I could have written myself, except for Emily. And so, and so she was distinguishing the quality of Emily's work from just other novelists and writers and poets that she had read. And she said the most beautiful thing. She said, she just stands a lot closer to the world than I do. And you're going to see that in her poetry. She's going to stand closer to the world than most of us. She sees things that we don't see, and she appreciates things that we pass by. And I have a friend, Donna and I have a friend, Kathy Gibson, that lives here in Tampa. She's an appreciator of art. She really is. And if she's driving her car out in the countryside and she sees something, she may see a cow eating out of a trough or something, but she sees art in it, and she'll just stop her car and get out and go take a picture. And one of the most beautiful pictures she put in recently was of a row of houses in a sort of a development that were like rental houses or workers' houses. And so they were not nice houses at all, but they were painted different colors. There would be a yellow one and a red one and a blue one and a green one, and they were and she took a picture of that. It's just beautiful. I'll try to find it, and if I do, I'll send it to you. But she's an example of someone that I envy, because she sees things that I would drive right by and not see, and she sees art in them. And that's the way Emily Dickinson was. She could see art in a patch of clover with bees, you know, in the clover buds, and she would just write a poem about it. And so that's a gift that people have. And she obviously was very intelligent, and she thinking of who may have lived when she lived, there were other famous poets and literary people that were of the same era as Emily Dickinson were, and I wrote down a few of them. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born in 1803. Thoreau was 1817. Walt Whitman was 1819. Charlotte Bronte was 1816, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning was 1806. All of these were famous literary persons that Emily would have probably known about, but not have been influenced by, because they were too close to her own time to have their works published and appreciated. But she might have just known of them, and I know she did Whitman. And so the more influences on Emily would have been long ago. Shakespeare, for example, she really understood and knew Shakespeare and studied Shakespeare thoroughly, and of course all the way back to Greek literature she would have been familiar with. She would have been familiar with John Donne, which is was about a 1600 period British a literary person that was famous, and so it would have gone further back than these people that were more her contemporaries. I mentioned her church. It was called the Village Meeting House, which incidentally is now today the Amherst College Administrative Office. Is in the old church that Emily Dickinson went to when she was a child. Emily Dickinson only had 7 poems published in her lifetime. She wrote over 1,800 poems. And she wrote, and now her archives in Amherst has over 1,000 letters, and they have them at various universities and so forth that she wrote. So she has a great body of work, but it was long after, or sometime after she had passed away before anything was published. The 7 poems of hers that were published during her lifetime were published unattributed. They were just, it would be an example like I gave you with the Valentine. She would send the Valentine to somebody with a neat poem in it, and then eventually that poem would find its way into some circular or magazine or something, and there was no need to say that Emily Dickinson wrote it, because nobody knew who that was. So it just wouldn't be attributed.
Molly, was she aware that those poems were published?
Yes, she was, and she had no interest in pursuing during her lifetime the publication of her work. She wanted validation, and if we get to that tonight, we will, and if we don't, we can get it next time. She sought validation of her work as a poet. She wanted other people to say, yes, that's good work, what you're doing. But she had no interest in actually having it published. That was not important to her. We'll get to in a few minutes the way that it came about that she started to get a little bit of interest in maybe allowing a few poems to be published. Of this 1,800 poems, one thing understand about Dickinson poetry, none of her poems have a title. Well, of the 1,800, I think there are 40 of the 1,800 that actually have a title at the top. So that presented a real weird situation when it came to publishing them. So what eventually worked out and later on is that every Emily Dickinson poem, the title of it is the first line of the poem. So that's the editors that eventually accumulated her work for publication made the first line of the poem the title. And I know I'm jumping around, but all this is just, you can go back and assemble this as information, but these poems were written in such a disjointed, combobulated way, and such strange punctuation and such strange usage of words and so forth, that the initial efforts, and this is very important, the initial efforts to publish Emily Dickinson's work was really prostituted very badly because they, in good faith, because the people who were doing it said, well, we need to change this. It would be better if we left this comma out. We don't want this dash at the end of this sentence because it doesn't make any sense. So a lot of that went on. When Mabel Lemons Todd was the first one with Vinnie, they collaborated to publish with Higginson some of her poetry. There was a tremendous amount of changing and doctoring up this poetry to get it to what they thought would be a presentable way to show to the public.
Do you think that was partially why she didn't want to be published? Because do you think she was aware of that? Like her punctuation and the way that her poems were a little bit disjointed. Do you think that that's maybe why she didn't want them published? Because she was afraid that people might sort of attack them?
No, I don't think so. One thing about Emily Dickinson was that she was self-confident. She knew she was brilliant. She knew she had a command of the English language. She knew how to use words. And it's one thing to think you know a few words and you dare to use one every now and then that you're not sure if it perfectly fits where you're trying to use it. She went for it. And she didn't mind using the words that she knew. And so she knew she was a good poet, I think. But she did ask other people, and I think the Higginson, the initial Higginson letter that we'll look at in a little while is the most beautiful example of that. She asked other people for affirmation, not for the purpose of wanting to have these poems published, but what happened was that all the time that she became a recluse, confined to her room there at their homestead, she was writing poetry, turning them out right and left, and nobody knew it. So these poems were accumulating in a drawer in her room. So once she passed away, her sister and others found in her room hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poems, maybe 600 to 800 poems that were found that she had been writing over the last many, many years. And they were bound together very carefully and into what Mabel Lemons Todd referred to as fascicles, Fascicles, which I think if you look that word up, it does say, that's what it means. Tiny groups of things that are bound together in that way. These poems were bound together in little books. They had little ribbons around them or ribbons threaded through the binders and everything, and they were packed away into these drawers. But never, because they found so many hundreds of these poems, never think that these poems were just dashed off willy-nilly by Emily Dickinson, that she would sit down and write 7 or 8 poems in a day and that had no quality. She pored over these poems. And one of the reasons that they know that is because you'll see a poem that has many versions of that poem in her works. Where maybe spanning over 2 or 3 years, where she started a poem, maybe 9 months later, they would find the same poem that only had 1 line changed. Or maybe, and then maybe later on, it would be put into a more final form. So every word that's in an Emily Dickinson poem is there for a reason. It's no wasted stuff. And that's why our poems are very brief and to the point, because she knew, as I said, she knew language and she knew what she was trying to convey, and she had the nerve to do it, So it was just unappreciated at the time of just the volume of work that they discovered that she had done, and the quality of it just was unheard of and unbelievable. So I'm digressing, but if I see anything else here in the chronology, just a little bit more about the family. Emily's dad, he would, here again, he would be the typical staid, austere, puritanical leader, lawyer, Harvard graduate that would live in that era. It would sit around at night with a glass of sherry and perhaps a cigar and talk to some other man that lived in the neighborhood. They would come over and they would talk politics, or they would talk religion or something. And that was the life that he led. Emily loved him and they got along fine, but she recognized in him someone that was not a supremely happy person. They were just, they were more mechanical than not. And the same thing with her mother. Her mother would be the typical mother that would exist today. She didn't have herself a glass of sherry. She looking after everybody else. She was a mother that took care of the household and did those things around the house that mothers do, and was not a woman's place is in the home. So there's very little communication with her throughout her life. None of her letters or anything have been discovered. She just sort of was there doing the role of a typical mother. And that's just sort of the way life was in those types of communities. I can sort of visualize maybe in Chapel Hill they would be, and during that time there were, I don't know if I said, but it's about 2,500 to 3,000 people that lived there, and that may have been about the same number that lived in Chapel Hill during that time. So, or in Amherst. What I was going to mention, next door to Emily and her family, they lived in the homestead. It was a big 2-story house, had 4 bedrooms upstairs. One of the bedrooms back in the corner was Emily's room. And next door to them lived Austin, her brother, her older brother, and he had married a friend that had been a friend of Emily's since childhood. Her name was Susan Gilbert, and when she married, it became Susan Dickinson. They lived next door, and that home is still there today and has been kept next door to the Dickinson homestead. And so Emily's best friend for her whole life was Susan Dickinson. They were inseparable for many years. The poems that they have written to each other are very erotic. They're obviously two people that really love each other in every sense of the word, and to the dismay of a lot of people, there was a scholar that a few years ago gathered all of that correspondence and put it into a book itself, just the correspondence between those two people. And the name of the book is Open Me Carefully, because that was one of the phrases that was in one of the poems that Emily had written to Susan. She said open me carefully. So we'll take a look as we go on through these weeks at a couple of the poems that they wrote to each other. But and then Susan had 3 children of her own, and as I said, 2 boys that she lost before they became adults, and their daughter Susan, and Austin's daughter, survived to eventually be one of the important people in the handling of Emily Dickinson's works and the publication of her works and so forth. Austin, the brother, it's all like if there were no poetry involved in any of this, no poems at all, it would still be a great story. I mean, it would be a TV serial. Austin had an affair. There was a young professor came into town to Amherst, and he was the professor of astronomy. He had this good-looking wife, and before you know it, she's having an affair with both Austin and his son at the same time. And Austin was maybe 18 or 20 years older than she was, but they had a prolonged affair that lasted years and years and years. That Mabel Loomis Todd and Austin Dickinson. Emily knew about it. Vinnie knew about it. Susan knew about it. Everybody in Amherst knew about it. The one that knew about it even more than anybody else was Mabel Loomis Todd's husband. He just reconciled himself to the fact that his wife was having an affair with this other man, and it was going on and on and on, to the point that everybody knew that he knew it, and he knew all about it. He even, there's been instances where he would deliver a letter from Austin to his wife. You know, it'd be the transporter of a letter. He was that reconciled to the fact that they were having this affair. So that is I have a good book on just nothing but that, just the interaction between all of that, and some of the places that Austin and Mabel Loomis Todd would have a rendezvous would be in the Dickinson household, in Emily's house, and that was some cause of hard feelings, obviously, with Susan and Emily, because Susan knew that this was going on in the house next door to her house, and that Emily was tacitly at least approving of it. She didn't promote it, but she was allowing it to happen. So a lot of intrigue, a lot of affairs, a lot of skullduggery, and a lot of things that would make for a good TV series. Moving on to eventually, I wanted to make a point about the publication of Emily Dickinson's work. The initial publication of her, when Emily Dickinson died, it was the opinion of those that really cared for her that Susan Dickinson, the next door neighbor, Austin's wife, should be in charge of gathering, finding publishers, and publishing her work. Susan accepted that responsibility, but she was so long in doing it. She took so long to get it done. She was so meticulously careful with everything and gathering it and the authenticity of everything, you know, that Vinnie sort of got irritated with her, and she approached Mabel Loomis Todd for the two of them to work together to publish this portrait and to enlist Higginson's help, who had the connections and to actually get a publishing company to do it. So that is what led to the fact that of the decisions that were made to alter her portrait, to change it, and to adapt it to publication by grammatically changing it and so forth. You know, in those little fascicles, sometimes Emily would write out to the end of a line, and maybe she's out of paper, so she puts the next two words on, indents it back, and starts that over. So it's hard to tell, did she mean for that, would she have put that all in the line if she had had more room, or did she just do this on purpose? But when her portrait was eventually published, and we'll talk about who are the authors that published it authentically and who didn't, they were scrupulously religious to do it exactly the way she did it. If she indented it back to the first, that's the way they would do it. But the original books, they're published around 1880, 1885. The first editions of Emily Dickinson's works that was published by Higginson and Mary Loomis Todd were really just not authentic works. They had been altered and changed so much. And those books are still out there now. And those poems are still out there. So if you go on to Amazon and you buy a book of Emily Dickinson poetry, you need to know whether if it matters, you need to know, are these the poems that came down from Mabel Loomis Todd editions that have just filtered on down, or are these the authentic poems of Emily Dickinson, the way that she wrote them, with the same punctuation, the same spelling? There were actually words altered. They would say a more fitting word would be this word than that word, you know. So I would be skeptical right now to just buy a little book, say a book of Emily Dickinson poetry, because I would say this is probably not the real thing. But the real thing is out there. It is, and it's out there. And every one of these poems is numbered. Every Emily Dickinson poem has a number. And a lot of people just refer to them by number. Oh, I love 127. Oh, I love 1260. You know, like because as I said, they don't really have titles. And maybe the first line of the poem is something that you just don't want to repeat. So I'm jumping all over the place, but are there any comments or questions, anything so far?
I'm glad you clarified that, because I was curious as I was reading through your timeline and stuff about how many people just made so many changes to her work, when what we love is the dashes and all the interesting punctuation. So there are still books that have it the altered way, and then you can get books that have it her original way.
Yeah, you know, the books that were published in the late 1800s, that there were I believe six different editions of Emily Dickinson poems that sold out very quickly. So the Mabel Loomis Todd and Higginson publications were very popular, and they sold very quickly, but they were, like I say, not authentic. Now you can go on eBay tonight and you'll find one of those. It may say 5th edition or 4th edition or something, and they go for hundreds of dollars.
Mm.
So even those that have because they're just early, that's what. Oh, I know something I wanted to do was to show my share screen again, my great abilities here. Okay. This is, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is an absolute known photograph of Emily Dickinson that had, and you'll see that photo right there will be on a good high percentage of the books of Emily Dickinson poetry that has her picture. Will be this picture here. Sometimes it's been colorized, so you'll see it in color. You'll see it that looks more glamorous than this, you know, where it's been photoshopped a little bit and that sort of thing. So for years and years and years, in fact, up until 1990, it was thought that that was the only photograph in existence of Emily Dickinson. You know, someone that stays in their room for the last 18 years of their life, they're not getting out and having their picture made. So it was reasonable to think this may be the only photograph. And I remember very well, I was starting to dabble in eBay about that period of time. And I remember that there was a photo that showed up on eBay for sale. And it just said, this is a picture of Emily Dickinson, just like they thousands of these out there, and this is one more. You know, the person selling it had no idea that there was only one, really only one picture of Emily Dickinson known. So the reason that the seller said this is a picture of Emily Dickinson, but was because in pencil on the back of the picture it said Emily Dickinson. So whoever had the picture wrote Emily Dickinson on the back of it. So this is, let's see if I can find it. This is that picture. Okay, can you see it? No,
No, it's not.
Yeah.
no, not yet. Right. Okay, wait a minute. I need to do share screen. Let's see.
We're in suspense.
Wait a minute.
Hold on.
I can't get back to my, oh, all right, wait a minute. Share screen. See it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
Okay, that is the picture of Emily that was sold on eBay in the early 1990s.
Huh.
And I remember the comment of the man that bought it. He said, I saw that picture. He said, I wasn't sure it was a real photo of her, but I figured I'm willing to go about $350. So, so to
Wow.
take a chance, and he enlisted the advice of another scholar that he thought knew a little bit more than he did, and they gave him a little bit of assurance that maybe that was a picture of her. So since then, it has been reasonably well, 90% at least, authenticated as a picture of Emily Dickinson. So there are two pictures of Emily Dickinson, and the second one is a famous eBay find by this individual. No telling what that photo is worth, but a lot.
Polly, I have another question. When you were talking about her sister-in-law and friend Susan Dickinson, that was taking forever to publish after Emily had died. Did she ever publish any? Did Susan ever get any published? Because it seemed like she was such a fan of Emily's work. I can't imagine that she would want to change it.
Yeah, she did, and there evolved over time two camps of people that were vying for Emily Dickinson's works, and actually some of the estate that that was in question as to ownership of property and so forth. And in other words, Mabel Loomis Todd claimed that Austin had promised her a tract of land or something. So there was a big squabble about that. But Susan Dickinson did get into eventually publishing some of Emily's works. That's right. And what I will do later on is I'll give you all the list of some books that you may consider if you want to buy a book on Emily Dickinson, which ones I think would be the most beneficial to you. I made some other notes here that I wanted to let's see. When I really apologize for jumping around so much, but and for being not as organized as I might be. Have you all ever heard of the master letters that she wrote?
Not till you
Yeah.
reference.
Not until you read it in these notes. Okay. One of the things that was discovered when Emily Dickinson passed away was the draft of 3 letters that took place over a period of a couple of years. And they were letters that were addressed to Master. Now, it was obvious that whoever Master was someone that Emily was deeply in love with. This would be, in this instance, a male that she was deeply in love with. and she had written these letters but never mailed them. And she referred to herself as Daisy in these letters, which is oddly enough. And so now when everything about Emily Dickinson, people just cling to every little thing. If any little smidget of any information, or here's a poem that we hadn't seen before. But so the speculation about who this person was has really been at the forefront of Dickinson's study. Who was this master? Well, so that's why I put in these important figures in Emily Dickinson's life. I put in there the people that are suspects as to who might be master. And so every Dickinson scholar has their own favorite among the stuff. Oh, I think it was so and so, you know, and oh no, it couldn't have been him. So so those three that are the main suspects are in there. So having that little bit of background that I just gave you, you may want to go back and look at these and read them again. All of them would have been, there would have been no young dashing Clark Gable types. They would have all been older, you know, men that would have been more apt to have been friends of her father than of her, almost. In some cases, quite a bit older. And but there's a lot of history there, and a lot of interest. This Thomas Wentworth Higginson is one of the key figures in Emily Dickinson's life, and he was if you Google him up and look at Wikipedia, he was a tremendously well-known man in his own right. He was a Civil War general. He actually was the general over a African-American regiment in the Civil War, and he was a strict abolitionist that took part in a lot of efforts after the war for to erase all the vestiges of slavery and so forth. So I put quite a long little explanation about who he was, but he was a Unitarian minister, author, abolitionist, politician, and soldier. Well, at some point in Emily Dickinson's life, some of her friends said, you know what, you really need to let somebody look at some of these poems. They are great, you know, you need, and so she would resist that kind of thing. So she kept being encouraged by some people that were close to her, probably Susan Dickinson even, to let someone who really knew poetry look at her poems. Well, she, as I said before, I don't think she had any doubt that she was a poet. I mean, I don't know, no one can say how good of a poet she thought she was, but she wasn't embarrassed about her poetry, I don't think. But at any rate, at some point, she decided that she would write this. I think Higginson may have lived in Boston, and he had, after his retirement from the war and everything, he had sort of taken on a role as a literary expert and newspaper person and everything. And so he wrote, as I recall, he wrote an article that was published that it was for young aspiring literary personnel, encouraging them to step out. He used the word, you know, get out and let the world see your work, and all the advantages of having your work seen by people, to get it appreciated and so forth. So somehow Emily got his name and address, and she decided that she would send him some poems, and they talked her into it. So she sent him 4 poems, and I wanted to, if I've got the, let's see. Oh yeah, this, okay. Letter to Higginson. Now I need to share screen. No, okay, letter to Higginson. Share screen. Maybe by next time. Okay. No, that's no good. Is it on there?
There,
Yes.
there.
Yep.
Is it on there now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this letter is just terrific. She wrote this letter to Higginson in Boston or wherever he was after seeing his letter encouraging writers to step out. And she said, "Are you too deeply occupied to say if my verse is alive? The mind is so near itself, it cannot see distinctly, and I have none to ask. Should you think it breathed, and had you the leisure to tell me, I should feel quick gratitude. If I make the mistake that you dared to tell me would give me sincere honor toward you. I enclose my name, asking you, if you please, sir, to tell me what is true. That you will not betray me is needless to ask, since honor is its own poem."
That's like a poem in itself.
It is. Isn't that beautiful the way she
Yeah.
phrased that? And I think that last sentence, I wrestle with that a lot. That you will not betray me, it is needless to ask, since honors is its own pawn. I think that what she's saying is, if you're an honorable person, somebody doesn't have to ask you to be honest with them. You know, it's sort of redundant. If he's an honorable person, that she can sort of should be assuming that he's not going to betray her. But at any rate, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of Emily Dickinson coming out, if you will, as far as her poetry. And 4 poems she sent to him to read. He didn't like have I lost my Zoom screen? Stop share. Okay, listen. Okay. He didn't like her poetry particularly. He thought it was sort of amateurish. He certainly didn't like the punctuation. He didn't like all these dashes and capital words capitalized right in the middle of a sentence for no reason. So, but he let her down very gently, and he wrote back to her and sort of a fatherly way told her that he didn't think she was quite ready to be published, but yet he was encouraging in a way of he did say, send me some more poems, you know. So at least he didn't just dismiss her. He said, send me some more of your work. So that was very important, and that's what started decades of communication between the two of them. And he became sort of her advisor.
Did he criticize her that with that first letter and those first 4 poems? Did he critique those? Do you know?
Not the specific poems, but I mean, not line by line, but
Her general style.
He just indicated that she needed a lot of work, and he sort of told other people more about how he felt about her poetry than he did her. But so as I said, he's one of the 4 or 5 most significant figures in her life, because they began to work together forever. But really, you can't say in the final analysis that he was her friend, because he was the one that published her work in an inauthentic manner, and he never was willing to accept her just as it was, you know. So he a long time after their relationship started, of course, I told you earlier today that letters, back and forth, letters. So they had letters forever. And then they kept talking about him coming to visit her, maybe coming to Amherst to pay her a visit. Well, that finally happened in 1870, which would be a long time after her major production of her poetry. He finally, it would be 21 years, I guess, after they met, that he came to visit her. And I want to read you what he said, and it just gives you an idea of the power of Emily Dickinson. He said, after a little delay, I heard an extremely faint and pattering footstep like that of a child in the hall, and it glided almost noiselessly, a plain, shy little person, the face without a single good feature, but with eyes, as she herself said, like the sherry the guest leaves in the glass, and with smooth bands of reddish chestnut hair. She had a quaint and nun-like look, as if she might be a German canoness of some kind, and who prescribed garb was white piqué with a blue net worsted shawl. She came toward me with 2 daylilies, which she put in a childlike way into my hand, saying softly under her breath, "These are my introduction," and adding also under her breath in childlike fashion, "Forgive me if I am frightened. I never see strangers and I hardly know what to say." So this is her first meeting with this man that she has conversed with for years and years and years. They finally have got this first meeting. And he says she went on talking constantly and saying in the midst of narrative, things quaint and aphoristic. Is it oblivion or absorption when things pass from our minds, she said. Truth is such a rare thing. It is delightful to tell it. How do most people live without any thoughts? Or this crowning extravaganza, if I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold that no fire could ever warm me, I know that that is poetry. This is Emily talking. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that that is poetry. Those are the only ways I know it. Is there any other way? And so he doesn't know how to handle this. He said later about this visit to Emily Dickinson, he said, I never was with anyone in my life who drained my nerve power so much. He said, without touching me, she drew everything out of me. And I was glad I didn't live near her. You know, I have known a few people in my life that when you're in the room with them, they drain everything. They take up all the oxygen in a room. And I think that Emily Dickinson did that. You know, I mean, he didn't know. Here's a guy that's fought in the Civil War and everything else. And this woman is just, he's saying, let me out here, you know.
How much longer was it before he saw her again?
Well,
He said he saw her twice, right?
They actually had a second visit. So this was the second. There was a second visit, but I don't think it was any better than the first. She was just a kind of person that evidently was dominating with something other, her aura rather than her presence. You know, she did, like he said, she's just a wee little person, looked like sort of like a nun, you know, and so she wasn't certainly imposing. But did you all get a chance to look at the poem Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to do our whole hour without at least taking a quick look at least one poem, but this is one of the poems that she sent to him, and that's why so this would be one of her early poems. it's number 124. So one of the things that I'm going to do is as we just start discussing poems, I'm going to give you the numbers of those poems, even if I have to look them up, because a lot of times you look up an Emily Dickinson poem or Google it up, it doesn't give you the number or anything, but I'll try to associate the numbers with them. But this was one of the poems that she sent to him. And what do y'all think of this poem? Anybody?
I think it needs explaining.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you give us the high points here for the novices,
Yeah.
unschooled in the ways of Emily Dickinson?
Yeah. This is one of her, considered one of her good poems for sure. And she's talking about death, and so many of her poems are about death, but she doesn't always present death as something horrible or something to fear or to dread. And in the case of this particular poem, she seems to almost say that there is some comfort in death, that you're sort of relieved of some of the things that are going on in the world that perhaps are not all that great. She uses the term that you are safe in your alabaster chamber, in the chamber that you're buried in. You're untouched by morning and untouched by noon, and she uses sleep the meek members of the resurrection. She's starting to show some of her spiritual bent there by indicating that she believes that these people that are asleep are going to be resurrected, that there's a resurrection in store for them. And when she uses rafter of satin and roof of stone, rafter of satin, if you ever looked at the underside of a casket lid and it has those tufted rafter looking, that's what she's talking about there. And
I guess the roof of stone would be the whatever composition of the casket.
Yeah, or the tomb in which you're buried in, or mausoleum or whatever. It said, grand go the years and the crescent above them, the world scoop their arcs and firmaments row, diadems drop, and diadems are crowns. And now here's an example of why you have to have your dictionary with you when you read Emily Dickinson. And she says, and doges surrender. I did not know what that meant, but Graham did. I asked Graham.
Of course he did.
Of course it did.
So I asked Graham yesterday if he knew what a doges was, and he said, "Yeah, it's a Italian duke. It's from the 1700s. There was an elected office in Italy, in Genoa and Venice. They were sort of equivalent of being dukes, but they called them doges." So she's just figuring we're going to have to look it up. She knows what it is, and she's not going to give us much help. So
I thought that the poem, even though it was talking about death, I felt that it was very peaceful. To me, it was peaceful. And when she said soundless as dots on a disc of snow, just thinking of like raindrops or how quiet snow is, it just seemed like to me, even though she's talking about death, that even in death it was peaceful.
Yeah,
Waiting for the resurrection or believing in the resurrection.
I think you're exactly right. That's my feeling when I read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Like I say, although it's a poem about death, it does not present death in a hard manner at all.
Mm-hmm.
And in death, we're oblivious to all of the horrible things that are going on, and not horrible and not horrible, because it's just the the turning of the world that's going on.
The passage of time.
Let's see, was any other? No, I think that's about all about the gist of that poem. But it presents death in a way of anticipation of resurrection, and that during that period of anticipation, you're oblivious to anything other than peacefulness.
Mhm.
But this was one of the ones that she did send to Higginson. Any other comments or questions about anything we talked about tonight?
So good, so interesting.
That was so interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you for all this research and
Well,
timeline.
I will be able to be maybe a little bit more organized as we go forward, as we start talking about some individual poems. Her poems are going to center on nature primarily, spirituality in the context of afterlife, in the context of death, in the context of anticipation. And the main thing I want us to look at, and from Emily's standpoint, and here's the kind of thing we're not going to be able to have a firm conclusion, is if we want to ask the question, was she a Christian? Was she a person of faith or not? We're probably not going to get to the point where we're going to say yes or no, because her questions her poems are going to reveal a person that wasn't afraid to question things. She wasn't afraid to put into a poem. She said, I asked God, and did he care? She said in one poem, she said, might as well have been a bird patting his foot on his fence or something. That we'll talk about that poem. But that's the kind of portrait she wrote. She was just the way she was with Higginson. She's intimidating. But yet the other side of it is that she was interested in it, or she wouldn't have been writing about it. It was important to her. It was vitally important to her. But she was, when she was in the boarding school, and the lady said, I want everybody that's saved to stand up. Well, I'm old enough that I can remember when I used to be afraid at church that they were going to ask me to raise my hand if I was saved, or if I wasn't saved, or was saved, or something. And I'm sort of afraid. But so Emily didn't stand up. So that was just Emily. But does that mean she had a different faith than everybody else? I'm not sure. We'll look at her poems and see what we think about that. Okay, so in the meantime, let me know if you have anything you want me to particularly include, or any of her poems, and I'll be sending out some of her poems for us to look at. And one of the things, if you, and her poems are, some of them are sort of tough, but if you have a poem and it's a little bit of a difficulty, just Google that poem and say commentary, in the Google, and you'll see many commentaries on just about every Emily Dickinson poem, and you'll see what other people think that the meaning of that poem is, and then also the aside from the meaning, what she's trying to say is the meaning is the words that she uses. We got to learn that a diadem is a crown. Things like that. So, okay.
And if you think about sending us a list of the books that you might recommend.
I will.
Yeah,
I think that's important, because I think that it's important. To really enjoy it, you want to see it just the way she wrote it, and the same words that she used, even though she didn't. they even went so far in some cases to change a word to make it rhyme. Because all of her poetry doesn't rhyme, and sometimes it'll rhyme pretty good till you get right down to the end, and then there'll be a word there that doesn't rhyme with anything. And so, but she didn't care. That wasn't
What she was doing.
that was not her objective. So, yeah, that's important. I'll do that for sure. Okay, see y'all next week.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.